Hello, John. Thank you for coming back to the show. This, I think, is part, what was it, part 39, maybe?
Somewhere.
38, 38. It's this
38. Okay.
long series that we've been doing. I just want to remind the audience that we are live streaming on YouTube and simulcasting on X Spaces. If you have a question, please ask for the mic or type it into the chat, and you'll be able to have your question answered by John. And in the description of this video and all the videos that I do with John, you'll have access to his website. So click the link in the description of the video and sign up for the periodicals and maybe even do a reading. And we'll discuss about that and what that entails within the show. But John, we were talking offline before we started the show about this kind of concept that I'd like to introduce to the audience. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just take it just for the intro, and then maybe you can give me your perspectives on it. So there's this concept of periodicity with events, either because it's fractal. You know, human history may be fractal, but I also think that
What do
there
you mean
is.
by just, can you explain for everybody what you mean by human history being fractal?
All right, so there's a periodicity that at so many moments in time, either every 100 years, every 150 years, there is a
Cyclical. Yeah.
repeat of history or a rhyme of history.
Yes, a
And
rhyme or a cycle. Yes. A
cycle,
season.
a
Yeah.
season,
Okay.
right? So you can take a circle and you can graph it and actually get a sine wave.
Yeah.
Okay? So you can break it into different components and you actually get a cyclical pattern. So there is a theory out there that nature runs on fractals, or a Fib sequence, a Fibonacci sequence, a golden ratio. If you look at different aspects of nature, there seems to be a repeated pattern that is the golden ratio. Even the famous Da Vinci of Adam, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
and it's the first,
The
right.
this one. Yes.
And it has lots of golden ratios in it, or even the development of a fetus. If you
Mm.
look at the development of a fetus,
Mm.
that's in a Fib sequence. So financial markets also can be modeled in Fib sequences.
Mm.
So, all right. So back in 1907, there was a trust that went bust called the Knickerbocker Trust. They were issuing derivatives. They were issuing uh, paper, commercial paper, that they couldn't back, and they just kept on printing it, and then eventually it went bust. A derivatives market is basically, you have instead of selling a good that's an underlying, like gold, and you're just selling it on the market, you're selling a piece of paper that represents some ownership of some underlying, like gold. But if it's not regulated, it's just printing paper, right? And people speculate in this, and eventually it crashes. Well, this particular crash in 1907 was the Knickerbocker crash. Well, what happened? What happens 100 years later in 2007? That's Lehman. There was a
Lehman Brothers for
Lehman
everybody, the
crash, right?
beginning of the Great Recession,
Right.
which I have called, because the last Great Depression was called the Great Recession before it was over, and then renamed the Great Depression. I consider 2007, 2008 to be the Great Depression
Right.
that
Right.
we return to, with a
Absolutely.
different way of keeping it on life support. Go
Absolutely.
ahead.
All right. So now, what's another major event that happens in the 1900s? 1914. That's the beginning of World War One.
7 years later.
Right. Another cyclical number. So 100 years from that point is 2014, and that's where the coup takes place in Ukraine. So this is kind of like the beginnings of the war.
It's the birth, it was the seeding of what I believe to be, yeah, that was the start of the process that set in motion the current Third World War that we're in, the conventional version, I call it. Now, I'm trying to stay ahead of telling people as a futurist, like, the Great Recession was not what we called it until it was over. I predict that people will, everybody's still saying, well, World War III is still coming because they think it's because of nukes. No, World War III has been with us. Just a quick, then I'll get back to what you're saying. The Maidan coup, which brought the U.S. Uh, fought to bring back to replace a democratically elected Yanukovych of Ukraine, was replaced by neo-Nazis, by Victoria Nuland and a lot of the people that were in. She was deputy secretary of state during the Obama administration, and it was consciously done. The who's who of Nazism in Ukraine was, in fact, just recently, one of the key kingmakers of that, just a few days ago, was assassinated in Lvov. The former speaker of the parliament of Ukraine, who was Nazi Central. And so so long story short, that led to a civil war between the Russian Ukrainian states or oblasts against this new regime, which nobody had voted for, Ukrainians or Russian Ukrainians. And the Russians, which were targeted as being Untermensch, because the first thing they did was say, you can't speak Russian. You can't educate in school Russian. And basically, their whole idea was, we want to kick all you Russians out and take these industrial rich areas that you have created that were put in Ukraine that never really were asked to be in Ukraine, Crimea and all these places. And so what they did is they began to fight a battle of secession, and which they are now winning. But that battle began when Russia was brought into the fight, because the Ukrainians were going, with NATO's years of NATO's training, were going to invade the Donbass region of rebellious states, Lugansk and Donetsk. And I was back in 2021, I was writing and talking a lot about how that was coming and how they were going to do that. And that was finally going to provoke Russia to get fully into this war. And thus, on the 24th of February, as I predict, it should be and will be understood, this conventional war, Third World War phase of it, the conventional phase of it, began on the 24th of February when a preemptive counterattack, preempting the offensive, which was just beginning by the Ukrainians, backed by the United States and NATO, began this ethnic cleansing they were going to do of the whole area, kick all the Russian Ukrainians out or kill them. They'd already killed thousands of people over the last 8 years in ethnic cleansing. So this is one of the ethnic cleansings that's not even talked about. So, and that started the current Ukrainian NATO-backed Russo-Ukrainian war with US and NATO backing the Ukrainians as a proxy. It's literally a war between the United States and NATO against the Russian Federation. That's what it is. So I'm about to end. So that, of course, is one of the fronts. The other front is the Middle East, which erupted in 2023. It's just like with world wars. If you watch World War II week by week, very good series, because it shows you how the World War, the last one, was not just some big Hollywood thing. It just erupted all over the place. It starts a little here, it starts a little there, and then it grows. And it didn't really become, just like World War II was not called World War II until 1941 at the end. It's everybody goes back and says, well, we in hindsight said it started with the invasion of Poland by the Nazis, but that was not in 39, but that they weren't calling it a world war. They didn't call it a world war until the United States came into it and Hitler declared war on the United States after Pearl Harbor. and also the huge titanic battles that began in 41 when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. That between that window, that's when this thing became a world conflict. And in the same way, this war has kind of got stops and starts going on because essentially it is a war of the fading hegemonic West, dominated by the United States, which is by making its dollar toxic for anyone to use. It is the rest of the world, the global majority, is awakening to its own powers, aided by China, Russia, and Iran as the triangle of protective states. Iran being there because strategically Iran is the Belt and Roadway. You know, the West would like to destroy Iran because it wants to sever Russia and China from each other, because the plan is to start a third campaign in the East, in Taiwan, which is supposed to happen. And we were just saying how this war, we talked a lot about how in our last show 2 weeks ago about how 2027, 2028 seems to really be 2026, 2027 are really bad years because of certain things that are going on with Jewish tradition, which will probably refresh everybody about Rosh Hashanah and blowing the shofar. And I probably said that wrong again.
You did it right.
Yeah. So somebody mailed me a shofar. What is it again? I'm sorry.
Shofar,
A
shofar.
shofar. Shofar, so good. I so I somebody out of the blue, I'd love them to tell me who they are, bought me a shofar, a horn of a ram that and a nice gift. Thank you, whoever you are. It's a very nice one. Anyway, um, so I've always said the danger has been, and we came very close in the end of last year. We became again in the spring up until through July a second time to this thing, this conventional scattered war becoming nuclear. And we're enjoy this lull we're in because I think in October, as I intimated in the astrology, October is going to be probably another big push of activity deeper into it with an economic side to it. So I'm about to finish. Sorry for the long thing, but I just want to make sure people understand what these cycles we're talking about are working on right now. That 2014, I even was writing about in my essays in those days in 2014 that I wonder if this was going to be 2014 was somehow going to be a repeat of 1914, which really triggered modern politics and modern times with the First World War, the first truly industrial dominated war that, and more so than most wars before, and especially it's followed by World War II, that made civilians, nations of people, targets. Not just armies, but really, the level of the civilian death and destruction was catastrophic and new to us. And the industrial precision that we could murder and destroy things was at a level that even 40 years before in the Franco-Prussian War and the Civil War, which hinted about these things coming, uh, that and I was saying how 1914, I believe, I'm adding this too, because 2014 has created a situation which may come to its harvest in this year and the next year of something, a new level of shock to the collective masses of people that are going into a darker thing than what 1914 in a lot, psychically speaking, was worse than World War II. We talked about, I think, 2 weeks ago, is that I'll just review it for a moment here. What happened, the innocence, it killed the innocence, the Edwardian age, the innocence and naivety of politicians down to people and everybody, of how industrialization after 40 years of no war had advanced military science to such a slaughtering level that no one was ready for the kind of casualties that took place. in World War I. And it, in a way, even though World War II was far worse, people got used to it. They could kind of roll with this darkness. And I'm saying we're about to have happen at the end of this year in the autumn, uh, a new abnormal that people are, which is not just industrial based, but artificially intelligent, artificially idiotically based. When it comes to people just not really, there's in a world where there's so much information accessible, most people have been trained not to know how to use it. In fact, they're being trained how to use information against their own good nature. So that's, I know this is a long tangent, but um, these are the backstories to what Paul's about to add in his thing. So sorry, Paul.
No,
Sorry.
all right. No, it's good to give the background on some of this
Yeah,
because this can branch off into many different ways, and this
many.
is an unstructured discussion. So just
And it's also undiscovered country.
right. Okay, so in 1914, the beginning of World War One. Now, if you go to 100 years later, that's when the coup is happening in Ukraine. Again, remember World War One starts really on the east side of Europe, right? In the Balkans, right?
That's right.
Okay. Now, in 1918 was the Spanish flu. All right. 100 years later, off by 1 year.
Oh,
So
just one important thing about the Spanish flu started in 1918, but it was not eradicated and passed until 1920.
interesting. Okay. Right, because of the different waves, the epi curves. Right. So,
Yes,
all right. So go 100 years roughly, and you have the
1920.
in 2019,
Yeah,
and you have the pandemic.
yeah.
All right. Now, what is also interesting with World War One ending with the armistice in the League of Nations, in what we call the interim war period, war between World War One and World War Two, it was really a I'll call a false peace that leads to another world war. So we are seeing the beginnings of another false peace with the Trump administration, with these quick deals and stuff. Maybe he gets the Nobel Prize, maybe not, but it ushers in another war that would be if this 100-year example stays true, we're looking at something much larger in the in 2030s. Okay, now I don't want to go too far into the 2030s here. All right, so we have financial instability that started with Lehman, and we're still feeling the effects of Lehman. So
Lehman
this is
Brothers.
2007. Just like how Knickerbocker Trust blew up in 1907, and it reverberated through the roaring 20s and led to the crash of 1929. So if we take this 100-year periodicity, that means that in 2029 or 2030, there should be a financial crash. Now let's go into the details of the finance of this. The Federal Reserve and the ECB, the European Central Bank, and the B of E, the Bank of England, all have a lot of assets on their balance sheet because of the quantitative easing that took place because of Lehman. Also, there was a lot of stimulus and quantitative easing because of COVID.
Yep.
All right.
Huge.
So as they've been trying to sell off the balance sheet called quantitative tightening, the markets start to convulse, and the interest rates on the bonds start to go up. So any revolving debt for the different different countries, the sovereigns, what will happen is that their borrowing costs go up. And so they have to have their central bank stop the quantitative tightening. So that central banks can never really get these assets off their balance sheet. So that means that there is a ton of money that's floating around, leading to inflation. All right. So this sloshing of money is going to lead to stock prices to go up, just like what was happening in the Roaring '20s.
Yep.
So equities are going to go up, but there's going to be a major crash that's going to take place that will lead to another world war. And I'm seeing, my sense of this is, my spider sense, if we want to use that term, is more focused on what's going to happen with China and Taiwan, and not so much what's happening in Europe, but I'm sure they both flare up at the same time. But we have been lucky to be able to be a prosperous nation coming out of World War II because we were unscathed. Yeah. Our manufacturing wasn't hit. We came out as the hegemon.
Yeah, the last economy standing, basically.
Right, so. Right. But this next phase of the Roaring '20s, right, and the Roaring
2020s, yeah, the Roaring 2020s,
right, and the financial instability that are in the Western powers will weaken them when they go through this crisis in the 2030s. And so, that's what I'm seeing now. What is interesting is I saw I saw an older show that I was telling you about offline here. I think it was published in 2015. That was on the History Channel.
Yeah, it was. I was on it with Mario Reading and I think a few other people. And it's one of the last thing Mario did before he passed. And a fellow colleague, Nostradamian scholar, one of the four people in the last 4.7 centuries, myself included, that wrote a complete translation of Les Prophètes, the main, more famous prophecies of Nostradamus.
But what is fascinating to me, because of some of the work I did in covering COVID, all right, in that show, it talks about a plague that was coming. And at that time, you got to remember what was in the zeitgeist in the news at that time. It was Ebola, hemorrhagic. These are some of the things that are coming to mind here. Hemorrhagic, Ebola, something that is a quick death.
What Nostradamus would call a blood plague.
Right. Okay. Right. Mm-hmm. Now you fast forward to what we just went through in 2020. All right.
Which was a blood plague.
Right. Exactly. And not only that, because of the serial passage that was going on in these different labs for gain of function, it wasn't just hitting one receptor, it hit multiple receptors. Yeah. So there's something called razor throat now. I'm sure you've heard this in the news. That's happening in Asia, and some people are starting to get it.
I hadn't heard about razor throat.
Okay.
Heard about a lot of other strange
so
things
razor
that
throat
MNRA has given us. Thank you very much.
So razor throat is a symptom where the SARS-CoV-2 actually attaches to some of the cells that are in your oropharynx. So you get that throat irritation now. Now, back in the day, the 2020, early 2020s, back in the day during the pandemic, most people didn't have sore throat.
No.
It was more, it manifested differently. The symptoms were different. So when I was talking to Stefan Molyneux back in April and May of 2020, I said that there was going to be what I call the pinball effect, and that there was going to be other receptors that will start to get more affinity to the spike on the virus that will lead to different manifestations.
Yeah.
So you're starting to see this starting to emerge.
Yeah.
And so I
just
have this
briefly,
like,
the MNRA plague, the cure that killed 20 million people and counting.
right. So there's two parts to this. There's the pathogen and I'll call it the inoculation because of the censorship.
Right.
So the inoculation.
The inoculation.
And then in the inoculation is coding for the S1 and S2 subunit, which is the spike.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you have the spike either on the pathogen or in the inoculation. That's coding for the spike in the inoculation. And there's lots of problems with it. All right. So what I'm seeing here is that what you guys were talking about in 2015 is actually what we went through and what is emerging. All right. Now, supposedly there was another influenza spike, another outbreak. Let's use the term outbreak. 10 years after the 1918 outbreak. So around 19, it wasn't as bad, but around 1928 or 29, there was an uptick of influenza.
Okay,
I have this feeling that there is going to be another substantial COVID event that is going to happen in 2019 or in 2029 or 2030.
Okay.
That is part of this event that's taking place. And when I saw that show, John, and I've saw many shows that you were on. I mean, you were on lots of stuff over the years. And when I saw that for the first time, and you guys were talking about it, was fascinating to see that this is what you recorded in 2015.
Yeah, it was a good show. I remember.
And I was like, and at that time that was like some of the Ebola cases were starting to happen, right?
Yeah.
And it made sense that maybe that was it.
Yeah.
Right. But I'll tell you, there's something there. There is something there. Now, to overlay all this,
Okay.
100-year periodicity, what we just went through, what potentially could be happening in the financial markets in 2029, what might happen with the surge of cases, because as antibody, as titer levels start to go down, as mutations start to arise, maybe even boosters that are pushed in the population, there's going to be some sort of an event, another event, pathogenic event that takes place around 2030. Now, Kissinger passes away. Now, I don't know if you want to do this or not, but I'd be very curious to know if we can look up I'll look it up, but if we can look up when Kissinger died, what that means with the astrology. Because my take with Kissinger, even though there are many people that hate him because of Cambodia and all this, I feel as though he was a key person that was on the scene that actually prevented or trying to prevent escalatory issues with Russia to prevent a nuclear war.
Okay, let me just add some things to that, because he was doing it at Davos. That one last time he was all hunched, in his chair talking, he rather shocked the people at Davos by saying his concerns about what could happen with this Ukrainian-Russian war and with Russia, and was not actually towing the line, as diplomatic as he was. I mean, it's true that he's a very checkered man, but one cannot deny his one could be against how he uses diplomatic genius. He was a diplomatic giant. Um, and we can argue about a lot of things about that, but that can't be denied. Um, uh, Kissinger was a giant. I remember following his trail when I was younger through all the situations and things he did. But he was kind of talking about how the globalist thing was failing. That's what I got from the things he was saying, and they were all kind of shocked about it. He was of course, he got old enough now where he's 100 or something by then, and it's just like he didn't give a damn about that. He just had to say what was going down because it was kind of he obviously understood it was kind of his last testament. And so, have you found when he died?
Yeah. So he died. All right. He passed away on November 29th, 2023, at 100 years old. He died in Connecticut.
That's interesting. The just maybe a coincidence, but uh, October 29th uh, was Black Thursday, the stock market crash of 1929.
Interesting. Wow.
And it is, by the way, even though, well, November 29th, yes. So interesting, vibratory, maybe coincidence of numbers. But yeah, so that's happening there. So go ahead with what you wanted further
Well, I was just
say.
wondering, astrologically, with what if there's anything there, knowing the importance with international affairs that Kissinger had, that if the death in November means anything.
Well, it I think in this case it doesn't. It's what he had let his death and the loss of him. It has a certain poetry of, for better and a lot worse, of how one of the last great giants of that era during the Cold War had expired, literally the last, in when it comes to diplomacy. I mean, Kennett had passed on, and Kennett actually, when he saw the advance of NATO towards the Russian frontier, said that'll lead into a world war. And he was no friend of the Soviet Union and all that. But when Russia folded, he said, that's crazy. If you go right up to the Russian borders, you will force them to go to war with you. And very clearly in 2008, 2007, remember, here's another parallel. That's when Putin came and did the Munich security speech, where he in 2007, yeah, 2007, early 2007, he's staring down McCain and all these people. And he's basically, long story short, you can see the speech and read the transcripts if you're interested. He basically shocked them very politely, as Putin was always a very polite, lawyerly fellow. He basically said, you've broken these promises. You're expanding NATO. You made a promise to the Soviet Union not to do that. You broke it. Actually, Clinton started breaking it. George Senior Bush was all for it. It was in writing, not official treaty. That was Gorbachev's greatest mistake of many naive mistakes that he made. It should have been written down, not one step beyond Germany. If we agree to unite, let you unite Germany. Because back then that was a scary thing because everybody's saying, oh, if Germany's all not divided, they might get strong and crazy and want to go to war with Russia. And look at what's going on now. We've got the Germans, wanting to put heavy missiles and other things under Merz. The current German government is kind of wanting to get into a shooting war with Russia again. So these people don't learn. Um, anyway, before I get off into many things to tap upon at once, um, The things do follow cycles, but they sometimes not so well. And there's another huge element in this that is really not a part, or maybe it's a reaction or response to a cycle that has been dominated by who? The Western world. When we look at a lot of the tulip mania, all way back, in the 1600s and all of that, one thing that they all share in common, whatever ups and downs of the economic cycles, the fractals, have been dominated for the last 500 years by the colonial empires and Western empires and Western dominance. This is a rare thing because most of the time history is not dominated by the West. We are a backwater. We have been. We were a backwater. Now Rome was was a power, but Rome was actually trading with the Chinese. There were people, it's not surprising, I wrote earlier about it in my May Day articles for Hogue Prophecy Report, that the lost years of Christ could very well be an example of where he probably, because Nazareth would have been a place where people were coming off the Silk Road and coming to do business in Judea, in the Roman Empire, Eastern Roman Empire, where a lot of economy was more happening in the eastern side. That's why it survived better than the Western Roman Empire when it split. That's why the language of commerce was Greek, and probably even Jesus knew how to speak Greek because it was the lingua franca of commerce in the Roman world. And if you study it, there were a lot of trade of silk and from India and cotton, and from India outfits and things and gold work, as well as people. Marco Polo was one of the last people, him and his family, one of the last people to from Europe to travel down there. So it's possible that some Roman traders turn the young Jesus into an adventurer and telling them stories about Buddha and other things that were going on in Asia. And he probably tagged along with them for those lost years. And people who knew, we're not talking about myths, they had been there. And that's why he ended up in Ladakh. That is why he ended up in these places. And that's why he brought back, as in earlier shows we talked about it, a very Buddhistic interpretation of, the New Testament is not that new. It's 500 BC talk. A lot of it is based on Buddhist scriptures, the Dhammapada, which Jesus learned. Anyway, I'm saying that to make a point here that there's another factor that's being missed, and it's I think this cycle that you're talking about is more rooted in the decline and fall of the Western hegemonic control of the world, with America being its top controller, and the rest of the European empires now being reduced to vassals. Gone is the French Empire. It's on the last vestiges of it in your period of 2023, 20. From the 2020s, we have seen the last bastions of French colonialism being systematically debased, with Niger, with what's going on in Niger and Burkina Faso in Africa. They're finally saying, no, we're not going to pay, we're not going to be paid next to nothing to sell you our resources at a price that's disgustingly unfair to the people of Niger. They had a rebellion, and the French had to get out, and then the Americans had to get out too. Now, the only vestige of anything French in Africa is a bit in Chad, but they're also going out too. The French colonies, one of the last colonies to expire. And there's if there's an economic crisis coming, I would just qualify on everything you said, Paul, is going to be a Western economic crisis. It will be isolated mostly to the West. And it's based on why is the stocks selling US bonds at values that make them 45,000, I just noticed. And I said, you know where you'll find stock markets that have those kind of numbers? Zimbabwe. When your money isn't worth anything, you can if everybody's into the same capital brain thinking head from the head. That's where capitalism gets its idea. And if it's from the head and if it's a good idea, everybody makes that good idea. This is classic Aquarian age stuff where atmosphere and thought and ideas become as real as something physical if everybody agrees to the idea and follows its rules. But that's not happening now. It's and that's maybe because it's a very Piscean controlled last 2,000 years idea of with the last 500 years being Western controlled. And what we've really got here is a world war between the US dollar and the BRICS nations. This is an idea. First off, let's get a few lies that are being thrown out for good. There's not going to be a BRICS currency. They gave up on that 2 years ago. They looked at it, but they realized there are burdens when you become a global currency that the United States is now ruining the karma of. It has advantages which may help us weather this economic storm that's coming better than Europe, because we are a continental country. Our geography is still in our favor of having two oceans and not very threatening neighbors. Um, the the United States could actually weather this a whole lot better than Europe, which, I mean, just last week, it's looking like Britain is going to have to ask for a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. And guess who else? France.
Mm-hmm.
France is having a problem, another political crisis about to happen, where they're going to have to vote for something, and it's not going to pass through. And it may very well be that Le Pen's uh, people will have a new parliament. And what it may also be is that the French president Macron may actually, uh, one option is he might early retire, uh, because otherwise he would be dominated by Marie Le Pen's people, which his people have tried, the globalists have tried to force her not to be able to be elected, making up some claims that she did something wrong and that she's going to go to prison for it. I mean, there is no democracy at all in Europe.
Can I ask a question,
Good.
John? So there's a working theory that suggests that if the war in Ukraine ends in some sort of ceasefire, long-term ceasefire or peace agreement,
Never will, but okay.
that France and the UK will force some sort of conflict in the Balkans to prevent the central bank from doing the quantitative tightening. Because the idea is that you have to have some sort of emergency happening where the central bank can't titrate the assets back into the market. Then do you see that as a possibility?
Well, as one of the finest prophecy trends person, uh, watching things since the 1980s, is Gerald Celente. I mean, he's so good that I don't approach his trends journal until I've got a pretty clear idea from my own work where I think things are going, and I'll read him to see if we're on the same page, and we're almost always on the same page. So I try not because he's that good. I don't want to be influenced by him. I really respect him. I think everybody should read his Trends Journal. But he has famously said, he has, like me, he makes new words that are wonderful, like the prostitutes for the press, the prostitutes. He's a Sicilian Italian American, and man, he's a great show to watch. He says, they're prostitutes. And and but one of the things that really resonates with me about him, he says, look, if you have economic crisis, a depression, you get out of it by going to a war, preferably a world war. Now, I've been seeing since the 90s another Balkan war happening in the 21st century. And I wrote about it in my Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies. During the mid 90s, I wrote that and published it with Thorson Books in 1997. And I was shocked when I'm doing my upgrade of all of that, the Nostradamus project. I was shocked. I was not planning to have to actually re-quote a lot of what I had in that book, but I had to because it was all surprisingly accurate. I was even surprised. And yeah, and in the new editions, I was already a year or two ago putting entries in the updates showing how, yeah, there's definitely a plan to stir up the Balkans again, 1914 style.
Mhm. Let me
And
let me just
I think
say,
that's going to be a front that's going to come up. And but before that comes up, very important thing. I was even having talks with a friend of mine in France this morning about it. And this person is deciding she's French and deciding where she ought to be. And I just had to say, I think you could try to be in France for a while, but frankly, I think even though it's going to be bad everywhere in the West, and just remember that again, because I'm going to go back to the BRICS here, but this is a Western problem. Hold that thought. That America has a lot of things about it that has more potential to, with its isolation being now a favorable thing, to, and the fact that the MAGA movement is evolving into something bipartisan. I mean, it's not hitched to a god-like blonde orange man president anymore. It's a movement on its own legs. A lot of I when I look at how certain major figures of Bannon, Tucker Carlson, the Congresswoman, I can't remember her name this moment, that they're kind of growing into it. They're being critical of Donald Trump not following what he said he would do. Like America first does not mean be a bigger hegemon. America first means let's come home and fix our own shit. You know, it's just like let's go home and come back home, America. I've been using this, saying this for several years now. Come back home. Stop wasting your money and your treasure and your interests on Europe and all of this. Come home and rebuild the bridges here. Come home and uh, let us begin the long generational struggle to recover the industrial base that we gave away to China. It's not China's fault. It was because of our lack of vision. We always thought that the Chinese would just be our factory and we'd be the CEOs. Even Clinton famously said that. Well, Clinton has not a very good view of the future. Um, he and it's racially biased, I contend, not conscious. But oh, little Chinese, they're not gonna, they're always the ultimate laborers for everybody else. And that was really the kind of the great white Western colonialist was looking at China in the same saliving way, drooling way that everybody was looking at China in the European colonial powers in 1840 with the Opium Wars and all, where China, which was the largest economy in the world, center of economic activity for centuries, even during our dominance, that at that time, the British and the French, when they created the Opium Wars, and then the Japanese getting in, and all these attempts to break up China and break up its economy, well, that was kind of an upside down version of the BRICS. It wasn't that the BRICS were being created; they had been the East being dominant economically had been around for centuries, even when we politically were dominating the world for 500 years. And so that all got busted up. And you got to understand, you want to know the backstory of the Chinese, why Taiwan not is not going to go to us or be independent, is that Taiwan was stolen by the Japanese during one of the Japanese-Chinese wars at the end of the 19th century. And Formosa was then made a colony, as was Manchuria, was created into Manchukuo, and its industrial base. And what happened is from the 1840s to the end of the 1940s, with Mao taking power after the greatest civil war that ever was fought in men and material and time, the Chinese Civil War started in the mid 20s. And it lingered and then got to its climax when the Japanese in 1937 began in earnest their attack on mainland Japan. And frankly, I think the historians should take their pro-Western bias aside, and rather than say World War II started in 1939, it started in 1937. And it started big with Japan's invasion, Imperial Japan's invasion of the Chinese nationalists. And we're talking about titanic battles that we hardly even know of that happened there. I mean, the Chinese, just in the final years of that, 1925, again, there's the 20s again. Um, what happened was all the Japanese weapons were laying around when the Soviets came in Manchuria and basically overwhelmed the Japanese armed forces, which was the reason why Japan surrendered, not the atomic bombs. In fact, the Japanese were trying to surrender for 6 months. When Berlin fell, they were also ready to surrender, but we didn't. Uh, they said, we just want you to keep the emperor on his throne. That's it. Otherwise, that's our only condition. Otherwise, we'll do whatever you want. We don't want to become a divided Berlin, East and West Germany, which could have happened. A North and South communist Japan and non-communist Japan. That was the thing. If you read Japanese documents that have been translated, that's the motivation. Because frankly, all they did with the two bombs, which they left those two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, on pretty much untouched because they wanted to save those for the atomic tests, the atomic blasts. And and then a lot of people were saying when they realized the bomb happened, says, well, what's left to blow up? You've blown up, all our cities are in ruins. You know, so what? Yeah, it's a terrible weapon. Thank you very much. But so what? If they had launched those before all the fire raids, if they could have, that would have had more significance to them, because then all Tokyo and everybody else would be fried in the same way. But no, it came after the fact that Japan was laying down on the ground in a pile of rubble, and we dropped a few atomic bombs to knock over a few remaining walls. Um, and in a terrible, horrible way too. And the only good thing about that is that people got to see how horrible these weapons were. I, the to talk about Kissinger, the Kissinger effect. Um, Sometimes the dark things people do alchemically also can be a great help. The fact that Truman and all these people were just so desperate to launch these bombs off to scare Joseph Stalin and the Russians. Well, frankly, the Russians already were being given by the scientists of the Manhattan Project. Certain scientists, maybe even Fermi, were actually giving the information on how to build these because they thought America being the only person with a bomb like this, it's like Golem with the ring, you know, or Isildur with the ring of power. I have this nuclear power. And, a lot of the scientists realized that the Americans were given such ultimate power. Wotan with his ring in the Wagner ring cycle from Albrecht. The ring of power will absolutely destroy it. Destroyed Valhalla, it destroyed Wotan, it destroyed Isildur. It is it's the serpent, the ring with the serpent that eats its own tail. Um, so what was very good and a good thing about killing 360,000 Japanese and a few half a million more from radioactive diseases in Hiroshima and Nagasaki is that people saw how terrible, because even some people that were really good predicting Nostradamus were like Andre Lamont. In the 1941-42, he wrote an amazing book where he was quite accurate. And he started to look in the near future, and he said, this is before there was atomic weapons. And he said that he thought the next World War, the Third World War, would be with the Russians. And it was 1942. Russia was fighting with us at that time on our side. And he said 1950 would be the next big war. And of course, 1950 was Korea. And there was a very strong option there that President Eisenhower threatened China of using nuclear weapons to get them to at least end it in a cold stalemate, like a lot of people want to do with Ukraine. We'll get back to that too. Um, and even MacArthur kind of infamously stated, and people listened and thought, boy, this guy doesn't understand what he's saying, is that, yeah, let's just drop a whole lot of atomic bombs on China and that problem. Everybody had Hiroshima and Nagasaki on their minds. If there hadn't been those, they might, yeah, let's see what it can do.
Right.
And they would have dropped a lot of them. And they might have even had, back in 1950 or 53, they might have had a nuclear winter. Because we're now discovering it doesn't take a lot of atomic bomb blasts, about 100 cities on fire, uh, to do something to alter the climate, to cause, even, if it's a little nuclear bush war and a regional nuclear bush war in India, Pakistan. Yes, it would be hundreds of millions of people killed in South Asia, the most populous area of the world now, even more populous than China, with them next door, so a lot of residuals. But the up the the upwelling of clouds, radioactive clouds, and just the cooling off of the climate, it could have caused a severe global famine that would have carried maybe another billion, 2 billion people from famine, just from a little nuclear bush war of a few hundred weapons. So that was a good, that was something evil that could be used for something good, an awareness that these bombs are too terrible to use, except to deter their use. Now, unfortunately, we're in a very dangerous period now because people have forgotten that. I grew up with that legacy. I'm in my 70th year. I was in my final days as a 6-year-old in the Cuban Missile Crisis. My memories burned with that traumatic experience, and really, in a good way, has made me my whole career of wanting to know what's going to happen next and how to avoid the danger of nuclear war, which has never been closer than now. So, but get back to the main thrust of this symphonic narrative. Um, the whatever's going to happen, Paul, is going to mostly happen to the West. And maybe that's why you might be seeing, I'm thinking these crashes are coming sooner than the 2030s and the late 2020s. I think we might actually see the beginning of this in the end of this year. maybe 2 months from now, we might begin to see these things happening. But just remember, this is going to be isolated to the West because the West has isolated itself. 17% of the world population of 8 billion people. The rest are leaning towards the BRICS, the global majority. They're building a system which might be immune economically to what the West does to itself, following this very Western fractal set of fractals. So I think America will be hard for America, very hard, but it's like civilization ending to the Europeans. It's like the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and it's and maybe we're more like a bit of a recovering Eastern Roman Empire because we're better suited, have more of, and our economies are not linked so much to the failing Western Roman Empire. It's not West anymore, it's East. But the other thing too is the dominant nations of the world powers are going to be Russia and China, and America has effectively moved them together. And this idiotic behavior of our Western outpost called Israel in West Asia, doing what it's doing of late, is really backfiring on America and on Israel, as it's absolutely eating alive our soft power, Israel's soft power and our soft power. So in a way, the good thing out of that may be that the world is fed up with us. And we are going to be forced to go back into ourselves, into our worlds. We'll be forced to go back home and be America first because the rest of the world doesn't want to deal with us. And now there's a factor in there that is the most dangerous of all in provoking a nuclear crisis, because what happens in the West is that the West has been so dominant of the world that it's in their ego DNA of leaders to just not conceive that we could lose that. How can the world exist without us overlording it, being Atlas, holding the rest of the world in our greedy little hands? Well, the spheres that Atlas held have flown away. They are flying away on their own accord, and they are not against the US dollar, but we have made the US dollar so weaponized and so toxic. It all really started with all these sanctions that began in 2014, which I consider the beginning of the second Cold War that ended in February of 2022. A short Cold War. I've been predicting it'd be a short Cold War that would go hot. Maybe nuclear, maybe not, but we have a chance to change that. But 2014, that is, 2014, with the Maidan coup and all of that, began a process of sanctions. Obama began his sanctions on Russia, and the Russians under Putin were very wise not to do in 2014 what they eventually did in 2022. Otherwise, all the things that von der Leyen and the EU people were thinking would happen in 2022 would have happened. Putin would have been deposed, the government, the economy of the Russians would have collapsed, and to their merit, the Russians saw their mistakes, and since 2014 have been building economic siege walls, with the advantage they have in that the ruble has not ever been an international currency. So if you try to disrupt it, if it's just buying and selling inside Russia, who cares? So they built on that. They built on that, and I mean, even in 2021, when the Russians made a demonstration that when the Ukrainians were back in 2021 using that army, most of it being built and trained during Trump 1.0, So when he says he had nothing to do with it, he was the person who actually set it up. He doesn't remember that. It was mostly Trump's administration with NATO that started to train, prepare for they built one of the largest armies, de facto NATO army out there. I think only the Turkish and the American armies were larger, but we're talking about a major army, all NATO trained for years, mostly in Trump's watch. And it was in Biden's watch that the war started. And then we were just pouring even more and more stuff into it. But the training, well, the numbers now that are coming out from the hack that was done on the Ukrainian military records. It was a hack that I imagine it was probably FSB that did it, but the hack has all the records, all the people who are recovered and dead, and all the missing. Ukraine has lost 1.7 million dead and another million injured beyond being able to go back to fight. It's because of their tactics, because of the NATO never NATO never trained the officer corps of Ukraine to behave like modern multi maneuverable commanders. They didn't want to go in. So all those generals and people that are running the Ukrainian army are thinking like Soviet officers at the time when the Soviet system was corrupt. That's why they literally murdered most of their own people by just charging in. They were doing the human waves, not the Russians this time. The Russians learned from their mistakes. I mean, there was no reason why Russia had to lose 27.5 million, of which I think 9 million were Ukrainians in the World War II. But it, I can't really blame Stalin for that because they were caught by surprise and they didn't have time to do it right. But they're still demographically, Ukraine is even suffering greater than Russian Federation states on a demographic crisis that is around Russia. But anyway, the thing is, the the Europe is going to begin to financially crumble and then politically crumble. I've been warning about this. Um, the it's kind of Europe as a whole is suffering from a lot of really bad economic decisions over the last few decades, and 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 one of the people that I mean, Kissinger is one person to condemn, but one of the people that history should condemn, she's still alive, is Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel ran Germany, the heart of whatever Germany does economically and militarily affects the entire EU/NATO world, the vassals. She, in her long rule of Germany as chancellor, made sure that nobody better than her had a chance to be a successor. And all that was left when she was done with it was a world, starting with Germany and to the rest of the European world, a level of mediocrity in leadership that even makes the people of 1914, which were pretty dumb people running Europe, look like geniuses. The level of stupidity and comically incompetent people running Europe is a shock. And what they're also doing, because this is all mediocrity has no limits. Genius knows its limits. Mediocrity doesn't. But it also will try to suppress anything that's coming in, like the German SFB party, its conservative party. It's now the most popular party in Germany. So what's hopeful is that they might actually create a coalition with the conservatives in the coalitions that are also there and just get Germany out of this mess. What Germany needs to do is say, okay, we're out of this war. We're not going to fund this war. We know who destroyed the pipeline that took away our cheap Russian natural gas, which was the very foundation of European society, economically supported, with all our health care and stuff like that, because we got cheap energy from Russia. And that's why Germany was the fourth greatest economy and number one economy of Europe before September 2022, when Biden and Victoria Nuland, who almost couldn't help but try to admit who did it. It was so clear if you look at it. They were just once, they were hinting and nudging very clearly that the Biden administration blew up the pipelines. The United States cut off the the phallic strength of natural gas that made Germany functional. Now it's losing its industrial base. A lot of it's being sold off to America and China. It switched off all of its nuclear power plants before it had an alternative technology to replace them. It just started, oh, well, let's just cut it off now. This is stupid, stupid moves. Um, and so, and the other stupid thing that's happened is we sat on Germany too much all these decades to keep them down, keep them feeling guilty, keep them being spineless. I mean, we did the other extreme. Nazi Germany was bad. But what we've done in the post-Nazi Germany world is turn Germany into something equally wrong, a guilt-ridden, spineless nation, losing any sense of its heroicness. You know, and it's like this is what we do. We just do replace one extreme with another, and because it's the heart of politics and economics in the EU and in NATO, these systems will collapse, maybe before the end of the 2020s. I mean, there is a prophecy of Nostradamus, which is very intriguing because its index is 2Q22, century 2, quatrain 22. And sometimes, as Mario Reading was right sometimes, I mean, in that same documentary, the poor guy was trying to explain his new theory that every quatrain number is a date. And he fell for one of the I was kind of shocked that he went there because he's very talented. But even Mario got trapped by the idea of there's got to be order in Nostradamus's chaotic prophecies. No, it's Occam razor all the way. It is chaotic. The whole thing is chaotic, and that means it's the mother of order, but not a chaos hiding order. There are some ordered things that come out of Nostradamus's chaos. Just like if you have enough clouds making star stuff, as Nietzsche said, you have out of that, you have dancing stars being born. There are indeed maybe 100 or more of the 1,158 quatrains in the main Ep30 that definitely are naming dates. And I think this one, 222, maybe it stands for February 2022, the date that marked the beginning of the end of NATO, because it talks, Darton is an anagram, Darton, Darton. And you can make two anagrams out of it. And I saw this as far back as the mid 90s, and I put it in my Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies. I started saying, no, this is a prediction about the end of NATO. Way back then, when NATO was big, was the hegemon was behind it. It was now let's expand, as if expansion of European powers for 800 years to try to break up Russia always ended in disaster. Well, we're not learning from that. So anyway, I not only does the anagram make very clearly NATO, it also makes Dayton, Dayton, Dayton. What's important about Dayton? Dayton, no, Dayton, Ohio? The Dayton Accords, which had something to do, I think, with the resolution of the Balkan Wars in the 1990s. So the Balkans come back in again. Um, and so the Dayton, NATO, Darton, and it talked about how the flag of it would be, um, taken down and gathered up. And um, anyway, so it's one of the more remarkable, interesting, at the least, coincidences. Of course, if
Well, this plays into the idea that ramp up something in the Balkans,
that's right.
prevent the quantitative tightening from the Bank of England.
Yeah, that's what Kosovo's all about. Try to get Serbia back in the war, and now they're Srpska, and they're being really NATO's being really hard on Srpska, which is a Serbian area that's not incorporated into Serbia. Yeah, it's funny because it's the same stuff. I mean, there were two Balkan wars, one right after the other, that happened, I think, starting in 1910, the first Balkan War, and then that ended, I think, in 1912, and I'm not sure on these, but almost immediately after that, there was then 1912, 1913, maybe even a little into the beginning of 1914 was the Second Balkan War. So we could pull a Shanghai here and say World War One actually started in 1910 over the Balkan issue, which then became global.
See, this is
Just
a
like,
mistake that most historians make, is just that wars are these very disparate points in time. It's very
yeah.
delineated, and it's not.
No, it's like cancer is something that happens suddenly dramatic. Oh, I got cancer for smoking cigarettes for 40 years. No, it's more like cancer. That's where I disagree with those historians
right.
completely.
There's this there's this continuum, and it just
They're
easy.
trying to
One event.
create order and definitiveness when really reality is not so definitive and ordered.
Now, what's interesting about the Dayton Agreement is it was signed in November
Ah,
or 21. Here comes again, and
ah,
so 8 days off of Kissinger's death.
ah.
Death.
Isn't that interesting? Well, these are vibratory harmonics. You
There's
know,
on it.
it's funny. My master Osho, all, 3 7s, 21. The number 21 vibratory always came up in his. He was enlightened at 21. He had these 3 7-year cycles in his when at the age his astrology showed that at the age of 7, 14, um, and 7, 14, and 21, he would have a brush with death, and it wasn't clear if he'd survive them. And it's interesting because his memory of his past life was as a Tibetan adept in 700 years ago. And he was doing it's in the Jain tradition. That's probably why he ended up being born a Jain. But it's also a similar tradition where a Tibetan Lama, if he's done everything he's can do with the body, then he makes a ritual of conscious death where he um, stops drinking water, stops eating. Actually, my mom did this in her death. I said to her, "Well, this looks like it's coming. Do you want me to keep giving you water and food?" And she said, "No, no."
Mm.
And so in 6 days she did this, but it takes usually it takes 21 days, 3 weeks for the way the Tibetans do it to have this. And it happens that some of these adepts, when they die, they like don't even rot. They're just like, in fact, apparently his body is covered with gold in some hidden place in Tibet, like many other adepts. That's what we only surmise because there were some of the most remarkable accurate prophecies come from Tibetan prophecy. And they knew for hundreds of years the Chinese, and they knew the year 1950. they knew that the Chinese were going to come and take the place, and they had prepared for it literally for hundreds of years. And they knew when it was coming close, when the wheel came to Tibet, when the iron horse and the train came to Tibet, that would be the indicator that it's coming. And the greatest of all Dalai Lamas, the 13th, which preceded the 14th that we have now. And you look at his pictures, he was the 6th Dalai Lama of the 14 and the 13th were usually happen that, we're talking about in this case, where people are an embodiment of a oversoul. And so, like, I'm the oversoul, and these are my fingers. This one's the 6th Dalai Lama. This one's the 13th. This one's the last one, the 14th, and so forth. It, and I sense this in my own, I sense that I'm a part of an oversoul as well in my own occult experience. I'm a little finger on the ground. It feels that I'm not alone in what comes through to me. So anyway, so in that process, each finger is different, isn't it? This finger is not quite, this is left finger, so it's not this one, even though they look alike. And so all these fingers have their own mental body memories. And they will then use the body-mind vehicle. That's why every enlightened person has different means and ways of teaching people. The source is absolutely the same because it's, according to them, the source is absolutely everybody. You're all enlightened. You're just all pretending not to be. And your whole society is making you try to pretend because the society is a thing that moves. And the thing that moves creates time. And if it creates time, it creates an arc of growing and dying. And even the physical universe grows and dies in the same way. But here's the thing. Osho said this, and I hadn't heard it for years, and then I read it, and I said, wow, that is a very important statement. He said, animals live instinctively, not consciously. They're not in they're in an instinctive moment, but they're not aware of it. They just live and react and fly and eat, and then suddenly they got to make love, and then they do this, and they have kids, and they work with it. It's all very instinctive. But the thing that human beings seem to have as a potential is that we have an awareness of change. Now, how can you have an awareness of change unless there's something in you that is not a part of change? There's something of you that is not stuck in time. It has to be something that never changes. I've always said that atheists are far closer to the truth as long as they don't become dogmatic like theists. Theists get in the trap of creating God and Virgin Mary and all of that, and steps towards change, thinking that change is going to bring you to the thing you've been before you were born and before you died. In fact, the thing I'm talking about is something that has never been born and therefore never dies, because that's movement, that's time, and that makes a transitory world. So all the conceptions of atheists, I say to my atheist friends, are all concepts of the transitory time and the brain that's making them. So in a way, they're not wrong. When the brain chemistry dies, all that goes. But there is perhaps something that, if it can perceive change, it is not the change. It does not change. It's eternal. And that's the thing, the hint beyond the chemistry of the brain, that is simply a reality, not a theory. It's simply true that how can you know things are changing unless there's something in you that you certainly can't see. It's like invisible, but it's there, an isness, a presence that does not exist at all. So it doesn't have that change to worry about either. Because if you do not exist, you are free of existing or not existing. So this kind of takes it into a whole different form of hints, because the fragment can only hint. But that's why when people ask me, what am I say, I'm a luminous atheist. Um, I don't need to personify the source because I am the source. And so there's, the godliness. Osho used to hint, call it godliness, not God. There's no God. There's godliness. And it's absolutely the source of everything. Um, so anyway, that's a tangent, a little break from this. I will now go back into the situation. In the overview, I think a lot of this is going to happen sooner than later. It's all, in fact, this autumn we may see the financial crises begin to spread across Europe, and that will lead to political upheaval and revolution. Now, to your idea about going into the 2030s. I mean, I will bring in another theme that's now astrologically speaking, to bring back that issue too. You asked what's the astrological significance. Well, I will say not so much about Henry Kissinger. However, when he died and into 2024, we had the very long cycle transit, the transit of eras and epochs which Pluto rules in astrology. Pluto, the underworld underpinning our eras. Lord of the underworld, Pluto, um, basically what was going on, I've been commenting about it in my writings in 2023 and 2024, is there was these little dips happening where uh, in 2023, I believe Pluto was getting closer and closer to where it was having some relationship, not in a near conjunction, but with its future in Aquarius. The age of the United States began with Pluto in Capricorn, 27 degrees Capricorn. It in 248 years, that entire cycle has come back to reboot America, rebirth it, and the era, and with it, rebirth the middle class concept, the Enlightenment concept, and the what else? Uh, and the idea of an aristocratic domination of the 1% over the world. Last time it happened, the beginning, the aristocracies out of blood rather than the bottom line of wealth, the aristocracies, the royals, were at their peak. And they were fighting each other and they were in different camps. The royals of France were fighting the royals of Britain. And they were all, as I've said it before on the show, they were all coming to their peak because of those ideas in the British colonies, as well as in Europe, in France and Britain especially, because the industrial age was starting to get into its beginning prelude, and that was caused by the growth of middle classes in Europe, which were creating more and more wealth than before. And of course, the royals picking, being the parasites that they are, profited much from the mercantile classes that were gaining more power across Europe. And and they were overthrown in the French Revolution when Pluto was in Aquarius, well into Aquarius, as it is now, since the end of 2024. So the influence is astrologically is the shift from the Capricorn transit that created America to the long journey starting with Aquarius that will take another 248 years before it returns to pass over the birth date positions of the United States on July 4th, 1776. So that that is going to so we are going to go through a death and rebirth of the United States. It will probably have revolutionary qualities in it too. It may fail. Whatever is born will be a very different America that will build from that. But what's also changed is when there were only a small area of the world in the West, because it dominated it, that created middle classes. Now, 248 years later, the middle classes are global. Everywhere, South America, North America, all the continents, poor or rich, doesn't matter. There are burgeoning middle classes in Kenya, in South Africa, in Vietnam, and what is the future that Pluto's moving into is definitely enabling the BRICS. BRICKS. See, well, anyway, I can't. CS. I can't picture letters. It's a problem with dyslexia. I have to write it down. It's BIRICS. There you go. It means Brazil. The five original members when it was BRIC in the 1990s. The five original members were Brazil, Russia, BR, India, I. Uh, it's hard for me. Uh, China, and the S is for the S of South in Africa, South Africa. And which came in the early part, I think 2002 or early part of the new century is when South Africa joined and joined Africa, a membership of Africa into it. Now there are over 44 countries that want to join. Now already with the countries that have joined, especially since this war started, especially since Aquarian influence was triggering Pluto to create a new revolution, a new world order. And this is the very thing this world war is fighting against. The West, 17%, with a lot of power, military might, and influence, and politicized sanctioning US dollar as its currency, is fighting the global majority, which is 8 billion minus the 17%. And the core of that is a new system of economics. It often comes back to currency and buying and selling. I mean, that's what happened when hunter-gatherers became gardeners and farmers. They created more wealth, they created property, and they had to create a system of bartering. Well, the BRICS wanted to make an alternative currency and then wisely realized, no, let's don't become the United States. Let's learn from the United States what the United States hasn't yet learned about what's wrong with its system, fundamentally doomed. Because if you make a buying and selling currency a knife to stab the people you're doing business with, economically speaking, well, if they come, it had to happen. These things have their timing, and this move of Aquarius somehow is vibratorily bringing revolution back to the world. And in this case now, it's global. And in this case now, and the American hegemon and its vassals, including New Zealand and Australia, and its wannabe Western power, Japan. That's the little gathering. It's Canada, United States, the European Union and NATO, European members, the vassals. And then it's Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, the wannabe Western nation in Asia. The point man in Asia. and the unofficial point man being Israel and Western Asia, and East Asia, the other place. Well, this war is really strategically and politically about upending BRICS from happening, but it's not going to work because the BRICS are not going to make the mistake. They're using their own currencies. They have found a system like our SWIFT system. They've created their own SWIFT system. And we can join it if we want to buy and sell with them. They've never been against America and all of the Western nations in it. If they want to do the same system with the BRICS, they can use their own currencies like everybody else in the BRICS and buy and sell and trade. And just take all the warfare stuff out of it. Just take all this dominance and stuff. Just let's be a community rather than subjects of a hegemonic Western gaggle of 17% of the global population. I mean, if you want to bust the 1% running the world, you're not out to do it, but you're just doing it because you're sick and tired of being under the yoke of this. And so the thing is, if you want to break up the BRICS, you have to break up Russia and China and Iran, especially. That's why I think Iran will be attacked in October. And since we had our last show a couple weeks ago, I can say that one of the reasons that Israel will very unwisely do this is they're kind of trapped in the thing. All of Netanyahu and his Zionist regime's successes just remind me of the kind of madcap way Hitler just kept winning and winning, but in the winning, he was creating more burdens and overstretched situations. And I mean, Israel is following, repeating the same cycle that Hitler went through, even genocide. Um, and with each win, yeah, you take down Syria. That was a biggie. You've kind of backed Hamas. No, well, Hamas is in its holes, but the Hezbollah in Lebanon is lost its connection to Iran so that it can be a proxy of Iran. So, but with all of these hits, there's come a price that just like the Nazi expansion, the Nazis in Jerusalem are not able to. They're creating the same problem, and so what they're going to do, they kind of have to. They're going to have to strike earlier. They're going to have to strike before they're ready. They're going to have to strike while they're still licking the wounds. The devastation that happened to Israel in 12 days was extensive. And Iran said and Iran actually has the right, according to the United Nations, because Israel has already started these attacks, to surprise attack Israel. They actually have a right in the United Nations to do that because who attacked them first? Iran didn't attack on the Friday the 13th, unlucky Friday the 13th. Israel did. Surprise attack. And then the big dumb brother, as often call America's role in being the big, stupid, very powerful giant that goes, oh, okay, I'll go in there and hit Iraq for you and Syria. And, Iran, okay. And then we step in and we're going to really get it knocked back on our patootie too if we do this again. So that's all could happen in October, November. And so the consequences of that is, well, how does that play in this thing lasting into the 2030s? Well, it will in one regard, because we're coming to, and by 2034 to 2036 is the period where, in this case, rather than 7 or 8 passes, there are 4 passes, direct course retrograde, over the position that Pluto was in Aquarius on Bastille Day, 14th of July, 1789, when the French Revolution began. And in a way, as a baby of the American Revolution, the baby grew into the porthole that spread it all over the world, because the French Revolution, not the American Revolution, it was the French Revolution that brought it into the mainstream world, into the Western world, and then set off a series of revolutions first in Europe and then spreading to other places. I mean, you had 1830 revolution in France, followed by which ended the Bourbon and put Louis Philippe from Orleans into all described in Nostradamus' prophecies, and then he was superseded by the New Republic, which was superseded because of what happened in the 1848, 1849 European Spring, which saw revolutions across Europe. Even the Decembrists in Russia was later. And so these attempts, most of them failing, the Saxon thing in 1849, the major changing of Austrian Empire into the Austro-Hungarian Empire because of the Hungarian revolts, and the Prussian revolts in Berlin and all of that. It was all over. Um, they all stirred up a lot of stuff. It took a few more generations afterwards to see their demands actually met. Uh, Similarly, when this similar thing happened, talk about a fractal, because now we're out of Pluto, we're talking about Neptune's transit through changing the mass media message and how we communicate and how our arts express who we are and metaphor. In 1848, 1849 was the return of Neptune to Pisces, its home sign. And out of that came Wagner's music dramas and the whole mass media communication that changed the way the mass message is what Neptune does. It's also Neptune is ruled by as the earthquake maker, and it shook up with revolutions. Well, it happened exactly again in 2011 when after 100 something like 165 years, something like that, it comes back into Pisces. And they even called it the same thing. It was qualified as the Arab Spring, European Spring, Arab Spring, where a similar thing happened across North Africa and the Middle East. All these revolutions, the France, the Paris, the key was that spread it was Egypt, the ancient most civilization of the Arab world. I mean, it's where all the great literature and everything is there. And so that was their France. Cairo was Paris. The Tahrir Square was the Place de Concorde. And it created civil wars, and also all the hopes and stuff did not work eventually. And whole countries were destroyed by the West exploiting the situation, wiping out Libya, which is still a destroyed nation, destroying Syria. That took a long time, but they finally utterly destroyed it. Now it's in the darkness of an Al-Qaeda-based Islamic State under a headhunter, who even Trump was saying, well, he's kind of a nice guy. I kind of like go to bed. And so Israel's won at a great price. And the price is it's like dancing with the will of the wisps. You can dance with them. You got to keep going. You got to keep up with the will of the wisps of what you're doing. And then it's like in the Giselle, the ballet, famous ballet, where the hero drops dead from exhaustion. Well, Israel's heading straight for this, and maybe very soon. And that's the point man for the Western world and its abuses and trying to control things in the Middle East. They have to strike Iran now, because if they wait a year, which they should, to build up their own defenses and be prepared, well, that would have given the year's time it takes for all the Iranian crews that are learning how to use the S-400 Russian top of the line anti-missile systems, which all the weapons we give Israel and all the weapons that we have for defense are not compatible to doing anything to these. But if you strike them now when they're still green and don't really have it down how to make, it takes a year to learn how to do the S-400s. And the Russians are working with them to do that. You've got to strike them now when they're still learning. And so I know they've figured this out. So it's coming. It's coming. And Um, and even in that, there's a triggering of something that's upheaval of the world, and that is a lot of people are really uh, it's starting to come out that people are saying, stop this genocide, stop starving these people. It's global now. It's not for a long, long time. It seemed the press was not daring to talk about it. But the I will say it's a testimony to the media that I belong to, the alternative free media that's not part of the mainstream media. All these little guys and gals out there that have our little shows, you're a part of it too, Paul. And my sources are all these people that I write the Hogue Prophecy Report. I give my sources, and I hope that if you read it or become subscribers, that you go make a point of not just hanging with me, but just go, and every link I give you, go check them out and see what happens, and then compare them to what you see on Fox and CNN and the MSNBC and NBC, CBS and ABC, etc., BBC, etc., Deutsche Welle, etc., RAI, Italy, etc. And see and weigh both of them. And with time, I contend you're going to find that what you hear on the alternative media is what's really going on. Now, I don't say that lightly. I've taken 20 years of studying alternative media to see that I've vetted them for that long. So, and now I'm a part of it. So, the so something big is going to happen in the center of the 2030s, and I feel it is going to be, I called the 2020s the roaring 2020s. um, I called the 2030s and 2040s being influenced under the last chance human generation. That is, the people that have been born, that are being born right now, um, being born in 2023, 2024, starting. It's a new generation, the last chance generation. They're going to experience all these upheavals and things. And in 20 years, when they're reaching the 2040s, that's when, of course, a generation of children end up starting to have an impact on what they vote for, who they become your leaders. And then all through the 2040s and the 2050s, they will be leading the world. And the question is, will they go through these upheavals and revolutionary changes and experiences of these early big steps, early big travails of the Aquarian Age? Will they go, how will they shape the world? And how will they lead the world out of these crises? Or they won't. That's also a possibility. I'm not saying this is all a lot of times in the future, well, anybody says this is what's going to happen. Um, there's too much free will, even unconscious free will out there to always make that work. And if you say it, and if you have a lot of people hearing you, you're reshaping it, whether you're aware of it or not. So I'm aware of that. But so the just to wind this down, I'm sure there's a lot of people want to ask questions, and I'm going to wind this down. Um, the the West is going to be impacted most. The economic crisis is in the West primarily, and what it will do, it will speed up all other victims of Western monetized sanctioning to join the BRICS. I mean, Trump's I don't if he said he read that book on President McKinley, he at best skimmed it. My studies of McKinley and tariffs are, um, and he doesn't have any idea. I mean, McKinley used tariffs, and tariffs are key because what's happening now, the Supreme Court is probably going to now have to make the final decision on Trump Does Trump have the constitutional right to declare this an emergency? The Chinese, the deficit and all that. I mean, there could be a lot of arguments as well. Are you declaring emergency that you sold all our industrial base of the last 30, 40 years to the Chinese and they're actually making stuff better than we do? Is that an emergency about China or is it an emergency about you? You dummies and the dumb people that sold all that from um, Clinton, who had the idea that we'd be a service economy and that the Chinese would just be the wetback people that make the coolies that make it happen. He didn't use such language, but that's basically what it was. And all that white supremacy, economic, European, Western dominant stuff is all coming up now. And the coolies over there aren't coolies anymore. They are. It's amazing. Mao made this prediction in 1950, I think, when he took power. 5051, he said, defining economy as an economy where the most buying and selling is happening by volume, which I think GDP is a really tricky way to hide realities. But it's just look at literally buying and selling. How big is this economy? How much money is being generated and passed in that economy? Um, he said that China would attain that global economic hegemon or number one economy in the world as in volume selling in 2016. He said that in 1950 or 51. And exactly in 2016, with everybody in the West ignoring it. So, oh, well, that's not really how you calculate. Well, that's how he calculated it. So you got to kind of take note of that. Mao defined what he meant, and it's happened. And now you guys that used to refute it, now you're all very quiet about the fact that you're all even afraid that here's this buying and selling giant of an economy, which truly is outdoing you. You're not the number one economy anymore in what really matters, people buying and selling and money, currency flowing. They have more current in their economy than we do. Therefore, it's like they got more electricity, if you want to use that metaphor for it. So they are the number one economy. They've been so since 2016. And rather than just come home and make our economy again. So anyway, what was happening is that in when McKinley was president, about 30, 40 years after the Civil War, America's industry, because of the Civil War, had built itself up to a world power, status. And at that time, the Krupp Steel in Germany and British Steel wanted to dominate the market in America. Okay, if America is going to be a great nation, it's going to be built on British and German Stahl, you know, steel. And McKinley was wise to look at that and said, "No, I'm going to kind of tweak you guys and give you a 5 to 10% tariff. You come sell, but I want to favor my homegrown industrial base and not have you giants take advantage of it. So if you don't take advantage of it, maybe the tariffs go down. But if you're trying to give the steel cheaper than we make it here, I'm going to keep putting tariffs. The cheaper you make it, I'll put a little more." But it was just a selective economic issues. Trump wakes up one day after a 3 hour sleep, which is average, and he has this idea that, well, I'm just gonna take everything China gives us and make it 30%. I mean, what could go wrong? What could go wrong with that? Well, a whole lot went wrong. Upheaval on the planet, definitely. It and all this secondary sanctions to India that blew up in his face. Now India is buying even more oil from Russia. India is the Prime Minister Modi is no longer needing to worry about the expatriate American people that because they don't have any power to manipulate them anymore. In fact, they're probably thinking about going back to India themselves. That yeah, the Americans are being crazy, being idiotic. You, you can't. This is not going to tweak people to come a little more in fairness to you. It's going to shut your Western economy off from the world. And the world is uniting without us. So a lot of what's going to come in economic upheaval is coming. I'm not sure that the timeline of that's paralleling. A lot of parallels are indeed happening, but it's in Aquarius, this situation now. So it's a little harder to predict. It's because, revolutions kind of happen suddenly. They're not that predictable. They reach a certain critical mass. So I I think I you know in defense of your view, Paul, uh, it is one thing that's a common problem in prophecy, the ability of people to postpone their disasters, kicking the can down the road. So I can't rule out that you might be right about this really happening by 2029, 2030. On record, I'm saying, that's an option because I can't rule out the fact that, of course, it'll be much worse because they will quantitate. It'd be better if it happened now, actually, than it'd be better if it happened in 2008. But like what Greenland did. No, sorry, Iceland. Iceland, when they basically put their government in jail, they made sure that the money they had in their country that could just keep all the social programs going. If you lose those, then you have chaos in your little country. And they were fortunate because they were only 250,000 people. It's like a big village. Everybody knows everybody, but they put their bankers and their politicians that did all that stuff in jail and got a new government and made sure that even though a lot of the other stuff, the banks would still be able to keep healthcare and utilities and things basics for life. And they managed to pull that off and they rapidly recovered. I mean, people really should look at what Iceland did when that all happened. It's a model for the world. And I'm probably, if it's soon or later, I'm probably going to be talking a lot about Iceland when I talk to my Western readers. And on that point, I hope I mean, it was wonderful. You gave me a symphonic set of things to talk about, and I just wrote a Wagnerian opera in response.
We deviated from our normal.
It's a good thing to do in a lull.
Yeah, no, well, there is a news lull, but there's also what's also interesting. What happens in August is trading volumes go down in the financial markets. There does seem to be a sense that things will pick up in September. So, plus
But the
you,
war,
or,
but in October, Israel might
right.
be in a second diaspora. I don't know. It's a looming potential because the Iranians are going to, and they've said, look, if you dare strike us again, we are not going to stop with our missiles. And we have even more modern missiles that will pull out that you can't do. Our old missiles are eating up all of your anti-aircraft missiles, and you don't have even enough. It's going to take you years to those 12 days. We went through a year's worth of US manufacturing, at least, maybe 2 years. So you're just not going to fill those things. Your quiver's going to be empty. You're going to strike us. And what I'm concerned about is because this is such an extreme gamble, I would not rule out a surprise nuclear decapitation attack by Israel against Tehran and Gulm, where all the governments and stuff are. I mean, if they really want to decapitate, now the cat's out, the decapitated cat is out of the bag when they try. You can't do Pearl Harbor too. So you got to do something more violent.
Mhm.
And the only thing they've got are Jericho missiles to knock the walls of Tehran down. I've seen this scenario. I wouldn't even talk about it, except that because many scenarios I see that I don't want to give energy to. But if they lurk like a monster to the surface of the present, I have to talk about them. And I hope I'm wrong because I don't see. I mean, if I try to get in Netanyahu's head and try to think like a psycho, um, he can't decapitate these people, and there's a chance he won't even succeed with this. One thing for sure is going to happen if Iran is a nuclear Hiroshima, I mean the capital, or if he drops bombs on Isfahan, Natanz, Fordo, and Tehran and Qom, the holy city where the Ayatollah lives, supreme leader. If you want to decapitate a government and you got a nation that, unlike China's government and Moscow and Beijing, you can't do that. We have plans for that, but you can't do that because they're superpowers. And they will. I mean, if China just launched on top of the thousands of missiles that the Russians would launch on us for that from the dead man's hand, because they do have a setup like that. So it's just not, you can't do it without having 30 minutes later seeing the United States turn into a nuclear cinder, and Russia too. And even the Chinese can lob in a few hundred missiles. Remember, I said all you need are a few hundred to cause a nuclear winter of some kind, but this will be everything. And um, this should deter the United States and Israel, because here's what's going to happen. If Israel, I don't see where I just don't see how they manage to do a decapitation that can really have a chance unless they go nuclear as preemptive strike. And they could argue it because actually Iran's made it clear, kind of a mistake. I agree with Scott Ritter. A lot of people are yelling at Scott about it, but when they basically call their own commanders, some of the ones that got killed in Friday the 13th, were saying we are a nuclear threshold nation. Well, if you say that openly, then when I heard about that, I wrote some things in 24 about saying, oh, no, that's bad because that means Israel will have to attack you. And they might even argue that they have a right because if you're becoming a nuclear power state, they're they're going to strike you. It's what happened. There's these windows of danger when China lit a bomb in 1965. One of the causes for the border clashes that happened between the Soviet Union and Red China during that period, especially in 1969, which was one of the reasons in 69 that it came so close. It was a 2-to-1 option that Moscow was saying, okay, we have to launch nukes on Red China, take out their industrial base in one day, and prevent them from being able to build missiles. Because at that point, from 65 on, each year went by, there was a window where the Politburo in Moscow, Soviet Union, were thinking, we have this window where we have to do something really dire, but it may be for our survival because otherwise the Chinese will have the launchers and the missiles to put those warheads on in a few more years. And then we can't do it. And then we're in this arms race with them. And so we preempt. Israel's in that place right now. They put themselves in there for all the wrong reasons. The first one being stealing the information from the United States and being aided a lot by the French openly, as the French aided Saddam Hussein, and he came far closer, as Scott Ritter found out, because he was the guy heading the inspections. and the breaking up of the so-called nuclear arsenal that they still had in 2003, and that's why we had to strike them. I became aware of Scott because he started to put his neck out there, and he's retired from that, but he went and did hearings where he basically, look, I and my team know what Saddam Hussein has. And he doesn't have any of these weapons of mass destruction that year. We destroyed them all. And if there are any chemical weapons that are still stockpiled, they're inert now. They only have a half-life. If they launch them, they won't do any gassing of anybody. And he had all the information, all the things, chapter and verse, and they did not like it, especially a certain senator from Delaware, Mr. Biden, who really ripped him a new one. There's movies of that. Even the other senators, both bipartisan, came up to him and they, after the hearing, said that we apologize that that happened to you. That was just not right. And Scott, good Marine, he just took it, just stood there straight up and took it. Um, so the so I think it's possible it's going to be a nuclear attack. Now, what will happen is that the Iranians have prepared for that. They have hundreds of bases. In fact, they build the missiles. They don't build the missiles in Tehran. They build them in a number of bases under their mountainous country, which is 3 times the size of Ukraine. And I've flown over it many times. It's quite amazing. It's quite mountains, and you can hide a lot of things there that nukes can't get. And if you get them, and even if you try throwing nukes and where you think the bases are, you're not going to get them all. And the Iranians will then respond with no one holding them back with a conventional attack, which will destroy Israel and force the people living there to leave. If you hit them with nukes, they will destroy not only they did not destroy the water purification plants for desalinization, because they also would like to have some of that water for the Palestinians if the Israelis were even giving them that, which they're mostly not. But if you hit them with a nuke, they're going to make sure you all leave and stop messing with Western Asia. And they will hit. I think they will hit those desalinization plants. And without that, there's no in a semi-arid desert. There's not a lot of water for all those millions of people, and they will leave. Sadly to say, it'll be the second diaspora. And that goes back to what we said 2 weeks ago, which the kind of talk about the astrology is not good. It's really like Jerusalem being sacked and the temple burning in 70 AD, and it's the Romans then. It's that bad. And then it's that bad with Rosh Hashanah issues with the shofar not being blown and giving Satan his chance to do his due, to do his stuff. And there are, the shofar was not blown on Rosh Hashanah just before October 6th. I think it was October 7th. The attack happened, which started this whole new front, the most dangerous front in this new world war. And as we said in review, that's going to happen again on 9/11 and Rosh Hashanah in 2026 and again in 2027. And we talk, I mean, if ever there was a potential that the Jewish people living in the Jewish state have to scatter around the world again because it's destroyed, and the whole identity of a state that went to preemptive nuclear war. I mean, if they do this, this is politically the end of Israel. It's something that even the idiot news, mainstream news, can't hide. And it would cause climatological disasters too, that could alter the climate and cause famines and impact the government and impact politics and impact the economy of the world. That'll be the end of the Jewish state as we know it. Politically, everything. This is worse than the Third Reich, and that's why I call it the Fourth Reich. My Jewish side hates to say these things. I have Jewish heritage from Ukraine, Hasidic Jews, and that's why this. And so but part of me that's Jewish and been Jews in past lives, is something I hope will not happen. But I have to report. I have to warn. I won't strip naked like Jeremiah and run down the streets of Jerusalem saying, "Repent," because that's just not pretty.
I would say that 2026 is definitely a scary moment in time.
Yeah.
But it's. I think you'll appreciate this analogy. There's an option space, right? And and then when an event happens, there's a collapse of the wave function.
Yeah.
There's a singularity, there's a collapse of the wave function. But when in the landscape of optionality,
Yes.
there are probabilities that something could happen here or there, and they both exist until there's a collapse of that wave function.
Yes.
So we're approaching this 9/11/2016 date, people,
2026, yeah.
yeah, yeah, that that collapse of the wave function is approaching, and then an event takes place. Now, where in that landscape will it collapse to? We don't really know yet, but as we're approaching it, I think people have to consider a worst case scenario, and a
Well, and I'd even say
worst case
this.
scenario, it could be a new diaspora. Now, what is interesting is that the state of Israel, and a lot of people don't understand this, but the state of Israel is something different than the actual temple mount rebuilding of the temple. And we don't know what date that should be. So this whole state of Israel may have been a process that wasn't really intended for.
Well, that's how I read the prophecies. It's not, it
It's
wasn't intended. I mean, Zionism is a secularist Trotskyian-like concept. And even from their own words, like the George Washington of Zionist Likudniks, he said, there is no God. There is no religion. There's just the land. And he was honest. He was just stating it out. It's like complete materialist. I mean, so many of the Zionists, I mean, Netanyahu is not a worshipful. He's a materialist playing with it politically. He's not really a person seeking holy mystery of Judaism. And if you look at all the people around him, Smotrich and Gavir, they are the classic. We want to claim a political place as our own, and we politicized Judaism, and we politicized our people, and to force. And I mean, even one of my heroes, Moshe Dayan, he was very honest about it. He was saying, yeah, they hate us. We came in and we took their lands, which they've been in thousands of years. We've thrown them as refugees. Who's not to hate? So therefore, and he used a very interesting, twisted way to get people to be more like Spartans defending in a hostile sea of Arabs. Uh, so you've got to be a warrior. You've got to be always sharp. You've got to be looking over, and you've got to be defending this place because he's using the uniting of the tribes through siege mentality. And I quote all of these things. I was really shocked when I saw these quotes because a lot of I mean, I quoted it last year or the year before, 2023 on our show here, and I was thinking, all my heroes, even Yitzhak Rabin, it's a problem, and it won't function. It won't. I mean, some of my best contacts in Torah Jews and stuff, who have contacts in Jerusalem, and they're seeing the same way. So this is not how we were supposed to come, not as robbers, not as pillagers. This was it. We should have. It would have been us being welcomed back. Maybe in a state like Palestine, a lot of people came in the 20s and 30s, and they just wanted to live side by side with the Palestinians. And in fact, the Palestinians treated those Jews, helped them find the right water places, make sure they were sharing their knowledge because but those weren't the same people that really came in mass, the Zionists. Um, and I wonder if Jews had just slowly, steadily incorporated themselves with the Palestinians and lived with them, maybe that temple would have been built. Maybe because actually Islam, if you read the Quran, Islam respects equally Moses, Jesus, and the prophet is not actually the one that's supposed to come down. Muhammad is not supposed to come down and help the world at the end of their eschatology. They send Jesus, Isa, as they call in the Quran. Isa is the one because of he's the one to do it, but it's in their eschatological visions. So it's seed of Abraham needs to live among each other because they're all brothers and sisters of the same source.
So I see that with Israel, there's infighting between the secular movement and the conservative or the more religious movement.
Yeah, big.
Right. And Israel will be cursed if there's not a coming of the minds between those two groups.
Absolutely.
Now the bellwether is going to be the red heifers. So there were 5 red heifers.
Yep.
2 of them were
secretly sacrificed, I said.
Well, there were 5 originally. 2 of them weren't able to be ritually slaughtered because
there's some story that they did go to Shiloh and do it
right. So
not publicly.
Right.
I don't know if that's true, but
so this is my understanding of it. You had 5 that were originally sent from Texas to the Temple Institute that's in Shiloh. Now, 2 of them started growing dark hairs.
I thought it was white. I thought they had white eyelashes, but okay.
All right, white, dark, whatever.
Yeah,
but it wasn't red.
They're not red, so it's not. It doesn't work.
So it wasn't red.
Yeah.
But so 2 of them weren't able to be ritually.
Yeah, weren't kosher. Yeah. No.
The other 3, what the story, my understanding of the story here is that one of the other 3 were ritually slaughtered. The problem comes in is that there's something called the Paraduma, which is written by Maimonides. Now, the Paraduma is a part of the Mishnah Torah that tells what the sequence of events that have to take place in terms of the water purification, the slaughtering of the red heifer, where it has to take place, the purification of the Cohen, all the laws, right? Yeah. Very, very complex.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are young priests that never touched the earth.
Right.
They've been doing that. I mean, I wrote about that since 1999.
They can't be in, right. They have to be born in a certain way. They can't be in contact with the dead. Right.
Yeah.
So they did a practice. Now, according to the Paraduma, it has to be on Mount Olive. It was done in Shiloh. So if it wasn't done on Mount Olive, it's not meeting the strict guidelines of the Paraduma.
Why did they think it would work in Shiloh?
Because what here and here it gets even better. There was this YouTuber that says that he has some of the ashes.
I heard about that. Yeah.
And you got to remember, think about this. even if it was a Jew, even if he, I don't think the guy is Jewish, but even if he was Jewish,
He would know better.
there is no way that there was a proper slaughter. Let's assume they properly slaughtered it.
Yeah.
All right, in Shiloh, which I don't think they did, but let's just say they did. There is no way that the most holy thing that's on earth at the moment would have been the ashes of the red heifer.
Yeah.
There would be no way that he would have been able to have possession of it.
Yeah.
Someone would have shot him in the head before that happened.
No, he's just a crank. He's just an internet crank.
It's either he's BSing that he has ashes of anything.
Yeah.
Or it's a ritual slaughter practice because this Cohen is young and they have to practice this because it has to be done perfectly.
Yeah. All
right. So my take on this is that the actual ritual slaughter practice took place in Shiloh, but the real one has not. Now, if we keep that in mind, if these other two red heifers become they don't have the ability. The real term is not non-kosher, but the real term is that they don't meet the requirement for ritual slaughter. It's not even a sacrifice. It's just considered a ritual slaughter. Sacrifice would have to be burnt on an altar.
Yeah,
that's part of the temple, and it's
on the Mount of Olives.
It's not a ritual slaughter. It's just it's a ritual. It's a ritual killing to burn the ashes. But from a Jewish perspective, it's different than a regular sacrifice.
But it has to be the established thing that if they have the ritual slaughter, it's on a altar that is in full view on the Mount of Olives. Yeah. I've seen the spot where it's supposed to be.
So they did everything right in Shiloh except the location. The slaughter took place, okay, but it's not on Mount Olive. So this is taking the strict interpretation of the Parah Adumah. Yeah. All right. So I would, because this has to be perfect, because you got to remember what the ashes does. The ashes purify all the vessels for the temple and the Jewish people.
Otherwise, it's a false temple.
It has to be perfect because anything downstream is not right. So okay, and it can't even be in a possession of a non-Jew, and it can't even be in a possession of just a Jew. It has to be a part of the priesthood.
A kohen, it has to be a kohen.
So there's no way that someone could. There's no way that a non-Cohen is touching anything from a real red heifer ritual slaughter.
Which this person was not a Cohen.
So
online it was
it's BS. So I think what is happening here is that there's two left.
Okay. My
question is part of the reason why they haven't done the real slaughtering, the real ritual slaughtering, is the Cohen wasn't ready for it to be able to do it correctly. There's the way they slice the airway. It has to be perfect.
Whole way.
Right. The type of knife they use, the sharpness of the knife, everything.
The timing. It's ritual. It's like magic. You have to do it right.
Right. So this Cohen wasn't ready.
Yeah.
So there's two left. If Israel doesn't slaughter them before they become impure for the slaughtering, okay.
And what for the audience? What makes them impure? They get too old.
They could grow growth like a tumor, or they have the hair that it's not
changes.
If they're only allowed to have one hair on their whole body that's not red. If there's two or more, then it doesn't meet the requirement.
Okay.
So Israel is going through this gate, this possibility that they might be able to slaughter these red heifers on Mount Olive, and they'll have the ashes. Now you got to remember, these red heifers popped up during COVID. right? So,
No, actually, they've been trying this. I wrote about it in 1998 and it got published in 1999, my book Messiahs. I even had pictures of it and how they were trying to prepare for all this, and they were still breeding them to get
right,
the white hairs
right,
out.
right.
But
So what is
it would have gone
interesting
a
here
long
with
time.
the story is that two of the ones that were originally non-slaughterable, they're supposed to breed them.
Right,
You can breed them for
right.
maybe a future red heifer. So it doesn't make sense from the story. Why would they have practiced on a available slaughtered animal? Why wouldn't they have practiced on a non-available?
Yeah. Why would they?
So that part of the story doesn't make much sense unless there are biblical scholars or Talmudic scholars that says that in certain cases you may be able to slaughter the animal not on Mount Olive as long as you can see a
That
direct
they
line to the temple. So there's
that
this
actually,
interpretation on what
I
this,
know that's an interpretation, and
because it
that
has to be outside the city. That's part
yeah.
of the
No,
requirement.
no, I saw they actually now you jogged my memory, Paul. They were talking about that.
So, see, but the thing, but if it was a practice, I mean, logically, you would have practiced on one of the animals that were, they had
Imperfect.
two hairs. They were
Yeah.
not perfect. Now, so there is an odd thing about this
Well,
that
it's
I can't explain. I don't really know for sure, but if you take the paraduma in its strict form, and the authority would have been Maimonides on this, that
but these are Zionists. I hate to say it, but these are Zionists. I mean, these are Zionists trying to pretend to be religiously Jewish. I hate to say it that way, but
it could be.
I
So
mean,
I
and
just
there's a lot of pressure from the Christian Zionists this is none of their business. It should be the Hebrews should take care of this issue, and the Christian Zionists like Huckabee and all those people should stop slobbering all over this and go away. And that's what I saw. It was when I saw the people, because they were saying, we're here in Shiloh is where we're going to do it. There you can see it. You can see the mount, and they were all talking about that, and the idea that now it jogs my memory, that Talmudic uh, opening, which could be fiercely debated by the Torah people, the Kabbalists, you know. The problem is it's the Talmudic wing that seems to be really favoring the Zionists.
here's the key. Here's the key that it would have been better to do it on Mount Olive, knowing that any question about it being the proper ritual
Yeah,
process,
yeah,
because everything downstream is affected by this. It has
yeah, oh,
to be
totally.
perfect. So they would have leaned towards a conservative interpretation that
Yeah,
would have been in line with Maimonides.
yeah.
So because of that, it I think it was a practice run, and that there are maybe three left, not two, and that they actually practiced on one of the bad ones, not on a good one.
One
That's
would think.
now if they didn't slaughter, and they don't slaughter the other two or three that are left, I think Israel's going to fall. And I think that there's this countdown that's taking place,
Yeah.
and that if the shofar is not blown on the 26th or in 2026 on September 11th, and before then there's not a slaughtering of the red heifers, there is going to be a curse that's on Israel, because the secular movement and the Orthodox movement within Israel are not coming together to make amends and to usher in a new age of peace. Israel is going to fall.
Now, in a few weeks, Rosh Hashanah happens and it will be blown. Should they do it before then?
They should be doing that. they should be doing the slaughtering anytime from now before Rosh Hashanah of 2026.
Okay, so that's a period of time. Okay, and the other possibility too is the ranch may produce in its herd some more candidates
Right,
in Texas.
right, but right, exactly. But it has to be within the paraduma.
Yeah,
There has to be, there's a minimum and max. I think there's a minimum and max age. The sweet
yeah,
spot is about 3 years
yeah.
because you have to have it long enough to to prove that it's not going to develop problems,
Problems. Yeah,
you know, tumors
yeah.
or this animal's like almost perfect. I mean,
Foot and mouth disease.
it's
Yeah,
like
what?
so they're getting to the point where I think it's almost like God's like saying, I gave you 5 animals, you played around, you didn't do it, you still have the infighting that's taking place. You have 2 animals left. There's another countdown that's taking place that where you're not going to be able to blow the shofar in 2 consecutive Rosh Hashanahs. I'll tell you, this is if Israel, I thought that they would have slaughtered the animal by now, and it's just like I feel as though there's a test and that Israel's failing the test, and
Well,
maybe
because
it's
the people that are doing this are the power behind this are non-religious, politicized Zionists who started this whole mess by not coming to the Holy Land in the right way, somehow finding harmony with the people that were there. They were, and I think if it was supposed to happen farther down the road than 1948, and the whole thing was we're just going to pitch our flag here, ethnically cleanse everybody, 700,000 people out of their 700 villages, all into Egypt and the Gaza Strip, and it's this whole wrong way. I mean, talk about a heifer that's not right. This whole setup of the Jewish state from 48 on is wrong. That's what I see, and I
and
hate to,
the
hate to
metaphysics
say
of
it.
this, the metaphysics of this is that there hasn't been a red heifer that was that reached this level of purity
Yeah,
for the last 2,000 years.
I know.
So,
So
and
maybe they're not
popped
going to
up
be
during
one, but
this thing. What's amazing to me is that this thing popped up during the the pandemic.
yeah.
So there's this test of humanity and a subset of humanity, if you want to call it that, a subset of this is that what is going on in Israel. And if the Jews in Israel don't get their act together
Yeah.
and they don't slaughter that animal properly, I think that something really bad is going to take place. Now, that maybe it was supposed to be this way. They weren't meant
Well,
to
maybe
have it.
this is
Maybe
the
it was within.
retribution. Maybe the whole thing since 48 on, if I'm going to speak for God, is God, maybe God is saying, this is not how it's supposed to happen, folks. And okay, start
It
all over
might
again,
be
be
that the
scattered
Israel,
all over the world, and then come back in the right way.
you know, it's very possible that Israel has to fall before the Temple Mount can get rebuilt.
Yeah, I
And
think,
it's very possible. And if the ritual of Paraduma doesn't take place before 2026 Rosh Hashanah, I think that there is a countdown of Israel
yeah,
losing
I'm
big.
afraid that even though we've gotten to some very esoteric for our listeners and watchers into Jewish mysticism here, um, you know, uh, for those who don't believe in this, I would just say the importance of the intent, whether you can dispute this is a holy thing or not, if the act is not done right, it shows ill intent. If it's snuck through and not done right and then called perfect, it's a really grave sin. And it's Babylonian captivity time, you know. And irony is the Persians save the Hebrews when they conquered Babylon way, way back. And then Cyrus the Great helped the Jewish kingdoms, the Hebrew kingdoms, be rebuilt. And how ironic it is, the full circle, that the very people that saved Hebrews from their captivity are now the targets of potentially a nuclear strike.
I think
It's really messed up. Really
Israel's moving
messed up.
into a dangerous time period, but I think that it's also there's going to be a retribution shockwave from this
Yeah.
too in the greater population of humanity.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of big shocks like that coming. And the other thing too, just to say it, I mean, one of the most vibrant. I mean, I was watching Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. He spent a month with his wife Anya and their kids in Tehran, and they did all these things. And he went to the Jewish synagogues, and Iran has a vibrant Jewish community. You know, they're in the parliament. They're respected, and they're going to be murdering those people too. You know, it's like it's wow, yeah. Well, you know,
I mean,
that's it
there,
could
there
all come down in another few weeks, or it might take longer. I mean, again, I support a longer time in this case because maybe we can avoid it.
Well, there's a tradition that states that that there will be a potential opportunity to usher in the Messianic age, but if the Jewish people do not take that opportunity, then what it's going to happen is that it will be automatic in year 6,000. Well, year
Yeah,
6,000 in Jewish calendar is 215 years from now.
yeah.
So we may actually see this event that could be ushered in early, but
I
because
mean,
fighting
yeah.
doesn't happen, and then this messianic age actually is kicked down the road until 215 years from now. But that
Well, I think that's what's 250. What's the year in the Christian calendar? 215 years.
so that's going to be roughly 2,240.
Okay. Okay, 2240. That's interesting. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 0. Okay. 2240 AD. 2240. You know, that's close to the end of the second 250 years. That that starts to approach the Pluto return period.
Mhm.
I think there's another 20 or 30 years left before that as Pluto returns. But yeah, well, yeah, my sense is that's what's going to happen.
And
It's
think
gonna,
about it, it's like
I
in
think it's going to
probably
take at least that many years to heal all the mess that
Mhm.
Zionism has done for the Jewish community of the world, and how it's damaged itself, or the Zionists in this Jewish state is, I think, it's an anathema, and I think it's not. And I guess I hope I'm wrong, but I'm just. I would think it will take over 2 centuries to heal this and do this right. If these things in the next few months or a few years happen, it's going to take two to
mankind is
100 years.
going mankind if paraduma doesn't happen, if mankind is going to see atrocities that are worse than what we saw in World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
And the Jewish people will go through, like you said, another diaspora,
Yeah.
which may be even worse than what they went through in the 40s.
Well, yeah, because there's the world's much more interconnected, and I can tell you, it's just happened. It's just kind of finally hit the whole starving these people systematically and then shooting at them as they're coming in for these Christian Zionists who are mercenaries uh, in a war zone, and it's finally out of the bag, and the whole world is waking up to it. And you know. I don't think Israel will, even if none of this happens and somehow this war ends and it gets resolved, Israel is bankrupt itself politically and morally. I think the diaspora may have it in a different way. I mean, I was one last thing I was thinking an hour ago. I was thinking, well, what if the scenario is this time the Netanyahu's attack, a nuclear attack, is successful and completely decapitates Iran, has it all breaking up and falling apart? Uh, do you think that would make the world forgive that millions of Iranians are added to the millions of, and now your guys are talking about knocking on the door in Lebanon now and taking out all those people because that's part of the greater Israel idea. That's Israel in their view.
Well, play this out, John. There's a possibility within this landscape of probabilities. There is the lack of the power of the Duma sacrifice or ritual, slaughtering ritual. Jews are kicked out of Israel. There's a new diaspora. There's a nuclear war.
Yeah.
Many of the Middle East, what is left of the Middle East right after the diaspora, is nuked. And then you have 250 years or 215 years coming back where the Jews come back after, the radiation fallout, however this all plays
Well,
out.
the radiation's in
And then
Iran.
but the point I'm making is that there's a nuclear war that happens and the Jews are leaving Israel.
Yeah.
The point I'm making is part of the diaspora is to prevent the Cohens, because remember, it's only Cohens can do the
Right.
reboot of the month. That it protects the Cohens from dying. See, Hitler didn't understand this. Hitler didn't have to kill all the Jews.
No.
Hitler just had to kill all the Cohens.
Yeah.
And it'd be over.
Yeah.
But the whole point of the diaspora isn't so much, I mean, part of it is to punish the Jews, but it's a protective mechanism for a future date for the Cohens to come back. So the diaspora may act, even though Israel, they lose the land.
They're a target.
And
they've earned it, unfortunately.
Right. But the thing is that it ends up being a survival mechanism for the Cohens.
Exactly. Well, what happened before? What happened before? The Cohens survived because in these 2,000 years, hiding in a mass of other people is sometimes a way to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you're all in one spot,
mm-hmm.
I mean, if somebody dropped a nuke on Jerusalem right now and wiped out all the Cohens.
So you're going to have so there'll be hubris that builds up into the Middle East.
Yeah.
Because they kicked out the Jews. And then there's this there's this almost like Western culture versus Middle Eastern culture war.
Yeah, because a lot of the people that came were in Europe for couple thousand years. And I remember one time I had this Zionist uh, Secret Service kind of guy who was I was writing back and forth to him because he didn't like what I was saying, and he was a Zionist and he threatened that if I ever spoke in Washington, D.C., he'd come and beat me to death or something in front of everybody. So I just said, well, thank you very much. I will notify the FBI about that if I end up. So anyway, I was trying to explain things to him, and then and that's when I realized the Zionist is really a fascist because I talked about my own heritage. I'm not just a goyim, I have a lot of Jewish heritage. From my German side, the Hoffmans with one N and all that, Yiddish-speaking Germans, Jews, as well as Ukrainian Jews. And his response to that was, "Oh, you're not pure enough. Your blood's not pure." I wrote back and said, "What? You're calling me a Mischling? The half Aryan, half." And then I said to him, that's why he probably hated me so much. I said, it just dawns on me that if you want to find the Semitic people look, I don't agree with your pure blood number about this, so let's get clear. But if I were arguing in your favor, and you're looking for the purest Semites from the seed of Abraham, then it would have to be the people that didn't go into a diaspora and intermingled with other peoples. I think it's wonderful that Jewish people did that. I think it's made them richer, and given us so many things. And I told them that. But if we follow your racial pure idea, then the Semites, the red heifers of Semites are the Arabs. If you want to look at the way ancient Jews looked, look at Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I mean, look at the Arabians, look at the Arabs. They because they didn't intermingle with lots of other people, according to your view, I said, which I totally disagree with. Um, that's what really got him to start violently threatening in our interchanges.
I mean, I think in any religion, there's a group within it that is
Yeah.
just they're zealots and that
Oh, yeah.
just they're
The
just
zealots are running Israel right now. God help Israel.
there is a battle going on in Israel.
There is. I hope it gets more. I hope a lot of righteous Jews really stand up, or you're all, oh God, it's a mess. It could all end up in a nuclear war, because maybe the other scenario is Iran already has 10 bombs now. In my new Hogue prophecy reports, I was talking, a transcript of Dr. Postal talking, I think 2 weeks ago, I talked about it, is that they have enough of those things spinning the uranium. They have enough of them. They don't need a lot of them. They only need about 100, 270 of them an area the size of a small apartment. And they can, and with only he says I could power them with my Prius electric car. So you could hide that anywhere in Iran. And because the last step in the nuclear process is the easiest. It's like the top of the pyramid. You've built all the things, and now the cap is just like you can tick it up and go beep like that. And that's where they're at now. And so they have enough. They had enough fissionable materials to create 10 Hiroshima bombs. Half of that would be enough to take out Israel. It's because it's the size of New Jersey, So, if Israel launches on them, the Iranians may already be ready to launch back, and there you have it. It's interesting because years when this all started, I have a friend who's a rabbi who I will not name because of his contacts with his contacts with the Kabbalists in Jerusalem. And I get a lot of feedback about what they're feeling. And whenever he calls me up or writes me an email, it's like, I said, oh, now we're really in trouble because I got to talk to you. So, and he also saw, he might be even public with it. I don't know, but I'm not going to say it publicly. But I don't tell who he is. That he also saw it would probably end up in some kind of nuclear exchange, and would have this process of purification would have to happen. So, we're kind of coming to that scenario. I hope not this is going to happen, but I mean, what they could do is if it's a Hiroshima-sized bomb, you can take out West Jerusalem, aim it right at the Knesset, and if it's a small enough bomb, it'll just take out the Jewish half of Jerusalem and preserve the Holy Temple and Mount and all that in the Old Jerusalem.
I mean, I don't
I
see.
hate to say stuff like this, but
Yeah.
I would never say this, but the monster's coming to the surface.
I can
It's my
see.
job to say something.
I can see them doing some sort of tactical nuke on Tel Aviv. I don't see them doing it on Jerusalem because of the
Yeah.
chance
Purification.
of hitting the Dome of the Rock.
But what they could do is they could definitely take out with the missiles. I look in the layout, they wouldn't be hitting the Temple Mount. They could definitely take out West Jerusalem conventionally, the Iranians. Maybe, they avoided doing that, but, if you take out Iran and Qom, the holy city in Iran, then they're going, and I think West Jerusalem will become a target, and all government buildings and the Knesset and all of that will be, and they know where the bunker is, where they all hide out, and that's the government they'll all be hit. So that would not cause nuclear radiation. It would cause a lot of devastation.
All these scenarios would cause major geopolitical tension.
Oh God, it's
Yeah, major.
it
I mean, even the Paraduma on the Mount Olive. I mean, can
yeah.
you imagine on CNN Live them seeing
Yeah,
that?
they're showing them doing it, and
Right. So that would create
well,
a
a
lot
lot of
of terror,
Islamic people would go,
right? Because they know
well, if
exactly
you're
what that
going
means,
there, then you're
right?
going to tear down Al-Aqsa and the Dome on the Rock, and you've
Right.
got 2 billion Muslims that are not going to like that.
Right.
And we've got a prophecy of our great holy crusade to take Al-Quds
And
back.
this is part of the reason why the government is not allowing the Temple Institute to actually do it on Mount Olive.
Thank goodness.
So
Good
there's
on you, Temple Mount, government.
so there's something weird about it. Now, if they don't sacrifice the animals, if they don't do the ritual, um, there's
And
some
they may go ahead and do it like that because, the Zionist movement is sloppy.
because it's going to be that's like a 24 hour ritual.
Who's going to know if they don't film it? Who's
Yeah,
going
but
to
if
know?
it's on Mount Olive, there's someone in Jerusalem. I mean, just with a drone or with a helicopter is going
But they
to
get
see.
a,
You're going to see
plausible
the Italy,
plausible
the Muslim.
deniability. Oh,
It,
well, no, it didn't happen that way.
it
They'd have
would.
to actually take a shot of something really wrong.
Well, I mean, it would be the most televised barbecue ever. I mean, I mean, I mean, just
Oh, well, this is one of our more unique shows
yeah.
among unique shows.
So, I mean, we're getting to
Yes. Did
the
anyone ask questions, or are all the
no,
crowd
we don't no,
like this?
yeah, they're just some comments about that they won't live long enough to see the 2020 wait the
15.
2240 time frame here. So but
Well, no,
uh,
I mean, no, I mean, if there's a war and all that, and if the diaspora will come back in as a good thing, protecting the Koyim and all that, and maybe from the sting of this, and it's not that long into the future. It's not like 2,000 years. It's going to be very fresh, and maybe some contrition will happen and atonement in a positive way, and maybe they come back into the lands of Palestine and they learn to live in one state with equal rights for both cousin brothers and sisters of the seed of Abraham. And there's no two-state solution. There never has been. But I've always seen a one-state solution. And oddly enough, the Iranians also see that. They they don't see the end of politically of Israel as an end. Everybody, because Netanyahu, the mistranslation I talked about, they were going to wipe Israel off the map. It was a bad translation, and it was explained. No, we just mean the political entity. That's why they call it that now in Iran. The political entity that's the Zionist state will no longer exist. But he was talking, Ahmadinejad, the president who was making this speech, I read the speech. He was making the point that what should be there is a state where Jews and Arabs live in harmony together and respect, just like Jews and Iranians live that way, and many other ethnic groups. Half of Iran is not Persian, live mostly in harmony, and that that's that was the state that they were talking about, where it brings back that idea in the 1920s and all, where the first Jewish settlers lived and broke bread and were neighbors, good neighbors, and the Arabs were good neighbors to them. And from that basis, because there's such a deep connection between Islam and Judaism, also, I'd say a closer connection than the Christian stuff, um, that maybe the temple, there would be some agreement that would honor the fact that it's the third holiest. Alaska will still be there and the temple will be there too.
Mhm. All right, so John, we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Yes, yes,
So,
getting late.
so we
It's one of
got,
our marathons. We got to 10 o'clock today or here.
yeah. So just quickly, if you can remind the audience about how they can support your work. Now, I do have a link in the description for the ones that are listening and watching. In the description, there is a link to John's website. So please click that link and sign up for his periodical and or try out a reading. So if you can
Well, the thing is that you go
bring
to
it,
hogueprophecy.com, which you'll see the link, and I just put up a new posting of this epic free samples of this epic, but a lot of free stuff to read. So if you want to read a lot of free stuff, there's a lot because this was a big sending. The last time I'm going to do something this big because of the events that were happening. So it's 10 articles. I should call them chapters of a 60,000 word book, fully illustrated in a PDF file that I send through your email. You know, the future sometimes requires we go backwards into the past. And one of the things that I'm doing is to protect my free speech and your freedom to read it, is to take a little step back from the full access stuff that's online where all kinds of AI and stuff is there. And so I send you a PDF file on the email you send me, and then you get to download it into your cell phone or computer. And in the same way, it's just not going to be monitored and censored like so many things are happening today. Um, so it's $60 for 12 months. That's just $5 a month, or you can do an automatic payment and just keep that going as long as you wish. And usually I send every 2 months, sometimes every month. It depends on the flow of what's going on in the world. Um, so read it a lot. We just touched the tip of the iceberg of a lot of stuff that's elaborates on what we talked about today. So tonight, and so yeah. So also, if you go, so well, you can read it, and then when you get to the end, there's a little thing where you can donate, and I'm completely public funded, and so if you have $5 to do it month to month in an automatic, or if you have $60 or more, um, it would really help this all go on. I literally, my financial future is in the hands of my readers and those who have the means to contribute something to this work. It's really the way it goes on for everybody in alternative media. The big fake media, they got all the corporate money and stuff like that, and the advertisers. We don't, because we we give you the truth as we see it and not the BS. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that you'll see at the top of the HogueProphecy.com, you'll see have a reading with John Hogue, and there's an email there. You click on that, you put Hogue reading in the subject line. That's the way I'll be able to see it with all the hundreds of. I'm wide open. I like to see anything that comes around the world. That means I get a lot of emails every day. So if you put that on the subject line, just that, then I'll immediately get back to you as soon as I see it, give you the instructions and what the reading's about. Basically, the reading has an astrological opening, and then it goes into a tarot card divination situation and just some direct back and forth from me, who I claim to be an empathic medium, initiated by my master to do this stuff in 1987 in India. And so you can have a one-on-one with all this energy, just you and me. And it's it's most people have a wonderful time with this. And I pour upon you what I pour upon the large audience. So and and you'll be able to respond, and we have these conversations, and many beautiful insights are there. And a lot of people are happy to have these readings. And I hope if you feel to have one, this is a perfect time to do it because the September and October are wide open. And so, uh, yeah, email me and we'll set it up. And you'll see what the prices is and all that then. And it's fair. Anyway, so yeah, that's about it. So yeah, sample it, check the free stuff. There's like another 8 more articles that I also have in just a little excerpts from them as well, some of the illustrations. And there we go.
All right, so the audience, please click the link that's in the description and go to John's website and take a look at the periodicals and the reading. Sign up for the reading. So, John, thank you for this conversation. It was a little bit longer than we normally do, and it's a
Uh,
little different format than we
yeah,
was
well, a lot of covering.
even more unstructured.
Well, I didn't even know what I was going to talk about. But I don't suffer it. I just say, I'm just going to stay open and it'll happen. It always happens.
No, I've been
And
playing around with
thanks for you setting it up this way because that was a very interesting
yeah,
setup.
yeah, yeah. So, thank you again for doing this, John,
Always.
and we'll be doing it again
Yep.
in the near future here. So thank you everybody for listening and joining. And remember that when we do these shows, you can ask questions on X Spaces or type questions in the chat. But thank you for listening, everybody. And John, if you could say goodbye to everybody before we.
Goodbye, everybody.
All right. So thank you, everyone, and we are gonna log off here.